Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of history's most monumentally tedious achievements, building the Great Pyramid of Giza. From hauling 2.3 million stone blocks up a ramp to spending 20 years perfecting the art of not dropping limestone on your toes, this is the story of humanity's first massive construction project that made modern airport renovations look speedy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up at dawn to the sound of thousands of men grunting in unison, which would be alarming in most contexts, but you're a pyramid construction foreman, so it's just Tuesday. Welcome to the Giza Plateau, circa 2580 BCE, where Pharaoh Khufu has decided he needs a tomb so impressive that people will still be arguing about how you built it 4,500 years later. Your job? Supervise the movement of limestone blocks that weigh as much as modern pickup trucks using technology that would make a medieval peasant laugh. The first thing you notice is the scale. This isn't just big, it's aggressively, oppressively big. The base of this pyramid will cover 13 acres. That's roughly 10 football fields if football fields were made of perfectly fitted stone blocks and designed to house a dead pharaoh for eternity. The finished structure will contain about 2.3 million individual stones, each one precisely cut, transported, and placed with the kind of accuracy that would make modern construction workers weep into their hard hats. But here's the thing nobody tells you about building pyramids. It's mostly waiting. Waiting for stones to be quarried. Waiting for them to be transported. Waiting for the ramp to be extended. Waiting for someone to figure out why the rope broke again. And waiting, always waiting, for some genius to explain how you're supposed to get a 2.5-ton block of limestone up a 450-foot tall structure without a crane. Your morning routine starts with inspecting yesterday's work, which mostly involves checking that none of the blocks have mysteriously moved during the night. They haven't. Limestone is remarkably stationary. Then you review the day's delivery schedule, which is written on papyrus in a combination of hieroglyphics and what appears to be the ancient Egyptian equivalent of profanity. 20 blocks from the Tura quarry, 15 blocks from the local Giza quarry, 3 blocks that were supposed to arrive yesterday but got held up because someone's wooden roller cracked and they had to stop to carve a new one, and 1 very special block that's been sitting by the Nile for a week because nobody can agree on whether it's supposed to go on level 47 or 48. The quarrying process itself is a masterpiece of patient brutality. Workers spend hours, sometimes days, carving narrow channels around the perimeter of each block using copper chisels and wooden mallets. Copper, not steel, not even iron. Copper chisels that bend if you look at them wrong and need constant resharpening by specialists who've mastered the art of making soft metal slightly less soft. Once the channels are deep enough, they drive wooden wedges into the gaps and soak them with water. As the wood expands, it slowly, very slowly, cracks the stone along natural fault lines. This isn't precision engineering, it's geological patience. Sometimes it works perfectly, sometimes you get a block that's shaped like Egypt itself and have to start over. The really fun part comes when you have to move these blocks from the quarry to the construction site. Each stone gets loaded onto a wooden sledge, which is basically a really thick plank with runners, designed by someone who clearly never had to push a loaded shopping cart across a parking lot. The sledge gets tied to ropes, and teams of workers grab those ropes and start pulling. How many workers per block? That depends on the day, the weather, the phase of the moon, and whether the guy in charge of rope maintenance remembered to check for fraying. On a good day, maybe 20 men can pull a standard 2-ton block across level ground. On a bad day, it's 40 men, 3 supervisors, and a priest muttering prayers to gods who probably have better things to do than worry about limestone logistics. The path from the quarry to the pyramid isn't exactly a highway. It's more like a very wide, very rough trail that someone optimistically calls a road. Workers spend their mornings clearing stones, filling potholes, and laying down wooden planks to create a smoother surface, because nothing says progress than spending 2 hours preparing the road so you can spend 6 hours dragging a rock down it. And this is where the real tedium begins. Moving a single block from the quarry to the pyramid takes most of a day. The workers pull in rhythm, chanting work songs that probably started as motivational hymns and gradually devolved into creative complaints about overtime, bad food, and whoever designed these ropes. Every few hundred yards, the team stops to rest, adjust the load, retie the ropes, and contemplate the life choices that led them to a career in prehistoric heavy lifting. The sledges themselves require constant maintenance. Wood splits, runners wear down, and rope attachment points fail with alarming regularity. There's an entire team of carpenters whose only job is sledge repair, and they work with the focused desperation of people who know that if the sledges break, everything stops. Once a block finally reaches the construction site, the real puzzle begins, getting it into position. The current theory, and it is just a theory, involves ramps, long, gradually sloping ramps that spiral around the outside of the pyramid, allowing workers to drag blocks higher and higher as the structure grows. It sounds simple until you realize that these ramps have to be constantly extended, reinforced, and adjusted as the pyramid gets taller. Building the ramps is almost as much work as building the pyramid itself. They need to maintain a gentle grade, usually around 8 to 10 degrees, so that loaded sledges can actually make it up without the workers having collective heart attacks. This means the ramps get very, very long. By the time you're working on the upper levels of the pyramid, your ramp might stretch for over a mile. The ramp construction crew works in shifts, hauling countless loads of sand, rubble, and mud bricks to build up the roadway. They pack it down, layer by layer, creating a surface strong enough to support not just the workers, but the sledges, the blocks, and the occasional supervising official who insists on inspecting everything personally. Every few weeks, as the pyramid grows taller, the ramps have to be modified, extended, raised, widened, or completely rebuilt when someone realizes the current design won't actually reach the next level. There's an entire department of ramp engineers, and their job is to stand around looking worried while calculating angles and muttering about load-bearing capacity. Meanwhile, the stonemasons are working on the blocks themselves because apparently just cutting limestone into rectangles isn't enough. Each block has to be shaped and fitted with precision that would impress a modern jeweler. The joints between stones are so tight you can't slide a knife blade between them, which means each block has to be custom fitted to its neighbors. This process involves a lot of trial and error. A block gets hauled into position, tested for fit, lowered, adjusted with chisels, hauled back up, tested again, lowered again, and maybe, if the gods are smiling, finally accepted on the 3rd or 4th attempt. Sometimes, a block that looked perfect at ground level turns out to be slightly wrong when it's actually in position, leading to the kind of creative Egyptian profanity that would make a sailor blush. The really maddening part is the precision required. This isn't rough construction where close enough is good enough. The Great Pyramid's base is level to within just 2.1 centimeters. That's less than an inch of variation across a base that's 756 feet on each side. Achieving that kind of accuracy with copper tools and rope requires obsessive attention to detail and the patience of someone who's made peace with spending their entire career on a single building project. The surveying alone is a nightmare of ancient trigonometry. Teams of rope stretchers, that's an actual job title, use knotted cords to measure distances and angles with mathematical precision. They're constantly checking and rechecking their measurements because a small error at the base becomes a massive problem by the time you're working on the upper levels. Every morning starts with a survey check. Workers stretch ropes along the baselines, measure diagonals, and verify that everything is still square and level. Because apparently limestone blocks have a tendency to settle overnight, and what was perfectly aligned yesterday might be slightly off today. The stone-cutting crews work with a rhythm that would put modern assembly lines to shame. Each worker specializes in a specific type of cut or finish. There are workers who only do rough shaping, others who handle fine detail work, and specialists who focus exclusively on fitting corner pieces. The sound of chisels on stone creates a constant percussion that echoes across the construction site from dawn until dusk. Tool maintenance is a full-time job for dozens of workers. Copper chisels need constant resharpening, wooden mallets split and need replacement, and the measuring ropes stretch and fray with use. There is an entire workshop dedicated to keeping the tools functional, because when your chisels go dull, everything stops until they're fixed. The logistics of feeding and housing the workforce is almost as complex as the construction itself. The workers live in a purpose-built city near the pyramid site, complete with barracks, bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities. Someone has to coordinate the daily delivery of bread, beer, onions, and garlic to feed thousands of workers. The administrative scrolls for meal planning alone probably fill an entire archive. Water supply is another constant concern. All those workers need drinking water, plus water for mixing mortar, soaking wooden wedges, and the occasional ceremonial purification ritual. Teams of water carriers make constant trips to the Nile, hauling clay jars back to the construction site. It's like running a small city that happens to be building a mountain. The work shifts are organized with military precision. Dawn shift handles the heavy lifting while the air is still cool. Midday shift focuses on detail work that can be done in shade. Evening shift does cleanup, tool maintenance, and preparation for the next day. And night shift, they're probably the smart ones, getting actual sleep. Quality control involves teams of inspectors who check every single block placement. They use plumb lines to verify vertical alignment, spirit levels made from water-filled trenches to check horizontal surfaces, and measuring ropes to confirm that distances are correct. A block that doesn't meet specifications gets rejected and has to be reworked, which means more time with the chisels and more delays for everyone. The rejected blocks create their own logistical nightmare. They can't just be discarded because limestone is expensive and difficult to quarry. Instead, they get sent back to the stone cutting area to be reshaped, assuming they can be salvaged. Some blocks go through multiple cycles of cutting, rejection, recutting, and reinspection before they're finally acceptable. Weather is another constant variable that nobody can control, but everyone has to plan around. Rain, rare but not impossible in Egypt, turns the construction site into a muddy nightmare and makes the ramps dangerously slippery. Sandstorms bury tools, coat surfaces with grit, and make precision work impossible until the air clears. Hot weather exhausts the workers faster, while cool weather makes the limestone more brittle and prone to cracking. Wind is particularly problematic for the workers on the upper levels. As the pyramid grows taller, the workers are increasingly exposed to desert winds that can knock a man off balance or blow sand into his eyes at exactly the wrong moment. Safety ropes become essential, but they also slow down the work because every movement has to be coordinated with rope management. The copper tools present their own unique challenges. Copper is soft enough to shape with relative ease, but it's also soft enough to deform under heavy use. A chisel that's perfectly sharp in the morning might be rounded and useless by afternoon. The tool makers work constantly, not just making new tools, but reshaping and resharpening existing ones. The wooden components require different expertise. Egypt is exactly not known for its vast forests, so quality timber has to be imported from Lebanon and other distant lands. Each piece of wood is precious and has to be used efficiently. The sledge makers, ramp builders, and scaffolding crews all compete for the best wood, leading to the kind of interdepartmental politics that would be familiar to any modern office worker. Rope production is another specialized craft that operates around the clock. The ropes are made from twisted papyrus fibers, and they have a limited lifespan under the stress of hauling multi-ton blocks. Rope makers work in shifts, constantly producing new lengths and inspecting existing ones for signs of wear. A rope failure at the wrong moment can be catastrophic, not just for the work schedule, but for the workers who might be in the path of a falling stone block. The administrative side of the project is equally mind-numbing in its complexity. Scribes maintain detailed records of every block quarried, transported, and placed. They track worker attendance, tool inventory, food consumption, and material costs. These aren't just administrative exercises, they're essential for coordinating a project that involves thousands of workers and will span decades. Work assignments are made daily based on a combination of factors: worker skills, tool availability, material deliveries, weather conditions, and the current phase of construction. A scribe might spend hours each morning just figuring out which crews should work on which tasks, and then more hours in the evening documenting what was actually accomplished. The pace of work is dictated by the slowest bottleneck in the system, and there are always multiple bottlenecks. Today, it might be a shortage of copper chisels. Tomorrow, it could be a problem with the ramp construction. Next week, it might be a delayed stone delivery from the quarry. The supervisors spend most of their time juggling resources and trying to keep different teams productive when their primary task is temporarily blocked. The seasonal rhythms of the Nile add another layer of complexity. During flood season, when the river is high, it's easier to transport stones by boat from distant quarries. But flood season is also when many of the workers are needed for agricultural tasks in their home villages. During the dry season, local transportation is easier, but water supply becomes more challenging, and the heat makes outdoor work more difficult. Equipment failures are a daily reality. Sledge runners crack under the weight of heavy blocks. Ropes snap without warning. Wooden wedges split instead of expanding properly. Copper chisels bend or break when they hit an unexpected hard spot in the limestone. Each failure requires improvisation, repair, or replacement, and there's always a line of workers waiting for their equipment to be fixed. The storage and organization of materials becomes increasingly complex as the project progresses. Thousands of stone blocks in various stages of preparation have to be organized and tracked. Finished blocks waiting for installation, blocks in progress, blocks that failed inspection, and blocks that are being reworked all have to be kept separate and clearly marked. Tool storage is equally challenging. With thousands of workers, each needing multiple tools, the daily task of distributing and collecting equipment is a major operation. Lost tools mean work delays, so there are workers whose only job is tool inventory and accountability. They know exactly which chisel was issued to which worker and expected back in serviceable condition at the end of each shift. The medical facilities stay busy treating the predictable injuries of heavy construction work. crushed fingers from mishandled blocks, strained backs from lifting, cuts from sharp stone edges, and the occasional more serious injury when something heavy falls in the wrong direction. The medical staff includes specialists in bone setting, wound treatment, and the kind of practical surgery that doesn't require anesthesia because anesthesia hasn't been invented yet. Food preparation for the workforce is another massive daily operation. The workers receive rations of bread, beer, onions, and garlic, plus occasional meat on feast days. The bakeries operate around the clock, grinding grain and baking loaves in quantities that would supply a small army, which, in a sense, they are doing. The breweries are equally busy producing the weak beer that serves as a safe alternative to water for the workers. Ancient Egyptian beer wasn't particularly alcoholic, but it was nutritious and less likely to cause stomach problems than water from questionable sources. Beer production requires its own supply chain of grain, brewing vessels, and workers who understand fermentation timing. Waste management becomes a significant concern when thousands of people are living and working in a concentrated area. Stone chips and dust from the cutting operations accumulate constantly and have to be hauled away. Food waste, human waste, and general debris all require organized disposal systems. It's not glamorous work, but it's essential for maintaining sanitary conditions and preventing disease outbreaks. The night shift have their own unique challenges. Working by torchlight or oil lamp flame, they can't do precision stone cutting, but they can handle material preparation, tool maintenance, and site cleanup. The flickering light creates constantly shifting shadows that make it easy to trip, stumble, or misjudge distances. Night work is slower and more dangerous, but it extends the productive hours and helps keep the project on schedule. Security becomes increasingly important as valuable materials accumulate on site. Copper tools, finished stone blocks, and food supplies all represent significant investment and potential targets for theft. Guards patrol the construction site and worker housing areas, not just to prevent crime, but to keep unauthorized people away from dangerous work areas. The social dynamics of the workforce create their own management challenges. Workers come from different regions of Egypt, speak different dialects, and have different cultural practices. Disputes arise over work assignments, living conditions, and perceived favoritism. Supervisors spend significant time mediating conflicts and maintaining morale among people who are performing back-breaking labor for years on end. Religious observances have to be integrated into the work schedule. Various gods require different rituals and offerings, and the workers expect time for proper observance. Some rituals are specifically related to construction work, seeking divine protection from accidents or blessing for successful completion of difficult tasks. The priests attached to the project perform daily ceremonies and maintain the spiritual health of the workforce. Weather prediction becomes crucial for planning daily activities. The supervisors develop expertise in reading wind patterns, cloud formations, and other natural signs that might indicate changes in conditions. A sudden sandstorm can halt outdoor work and damage uncovered materials, while unexpected rain can turn the construction site into a muddy hazard zone. As the pyramid grows taller, the logistical challenges multiply exponentially. Every block has to be hauled up the ramps, which become longer and steeper with each level. The time required to transport a single block from ground level to the working surface increases steadily, and the physical demands on the workers become more severe. The upper levels require increasingly specialized skills. Workers who are comfortable at ground level may be terrified of working at height. Those who can handle the elevation may lack the precision skills needed for the final fitting work. The supervisors have to constantly evaluate and reassign workers based on their abilities and the current needs of the project. Communication across the massive construction site becomes increasingly difficult. Messages have to be relayed through multiple levels of supervision, and important information can be lost or distorted in transmission. A change in plans at the top level might not reach the quarry workers for hours, leading to wasted effort and confusion. As the project nears completion, the pressure for perfection intensifies. The final stones, particularly the pyramidion at the very top, have to be cut and placed with absolute precision. These capstone blocks are often made of granite or other especially hard materials, requiring even more specialized tools and techniques. The dismantling of the construction ramps is almost as much work as building them was originally. All that sand, rubble, and mud brick has to be hauled away to reveal the finished pyramid. The ramp materials can be reused for other projects, but first they have to be sorted, cleaned, and transported to storage areas. Quality inspections continue right up to the final completion. Even after a block has been placed and accepted, it might be rejected later if settling or weather reveal problems that weren't initially apparent. Fixing these issues requires careful removal of the problematic block and precise replacement, often more difficult than the original installation. The final cleanup phase involves removing all construction debris, smoothing the surrounding areas, and preparing the pyramid complex for its intended ceremonial use. Tools are collected and stored for potential future projects. Temporary buildings are dismantled or converted to permanent facilities. The workforce is gradually reduced as various specialties complete their contributions. Documentation of the completed work becomes increasingly important as the project winds down. Detailed records of construction techniques, material specifications, and organizational methods are preserved for future pyramid projects. The scribes who have been tracking daily activities throughout the construction period now compile comprehensive final reports. And finally, after decades of methodical, painstaking work, the Great Pyramid stands complete. 4.5 million tons of precisely cut and fitted limestone arranged into a perfect geometric form that will endure for millennia. The workers who began this project as young men are now graying or have passed on, replaced by their sons and nephews who learned the skills necessary to continue the work. The finished pyramid represents not just the tomb of a pharaoh, but a monument to human patience, organization, and the ability to sustain focus on a single goal across multiple generations. Every block tells a story of careful planning, skilled execution, and the kind of attention to detail that modern construction projects can only aspire to achieve. As the sun sets over the Giza Plateau, casting long shadows across the completed pyramid, you can finally rest knowing that you've participated in one of humanity's most impressive achievements. Tomorrow, there might be other pyramids to build, other pharaohs to house for eternity, other massive projects that will require the same methodical approach to moving impossibly heavy stones with Bronze Age tools. But tonight, you can sleep peacefully, knowing that somewhere in the future, people will look at this monument and wonder how it was possible to build something so magnificent with such primitive technology. They'll theorize about ramps and sledges, copper tools and rope systems, and the thousands of workers who spent their lives turning raw limestone into eternal architecture. And maybe, just maybe, some of them will appreciate the incredible patience, planning, and persistence required to move 2.3 million stone blocks, one at a time, with nothing but human labor, simple tools, and the kind of methodical determination that built wonders that still inspire awe thousands of years later. The gentle sound of wind across the desert sands carries the whispers of ancient workers, the creak of wooden sledges, and the steady rhythm of copper chisels shaping stone, creating a timeless lullaby that connects us across the centuries to the remarkable people who built monuments that were already ancient when Rome was young. And in that peaceful desert silence, punctuated only by the distant call of night birds and the soft settling sounds of limestone blocks that have been perfectly fitted for 45 centuries, we can rest knowing that some human achievements are so extraordinary they transcend time itself, built one careful, methodical step at a time by people who understood that the greatest monuments are created not through inspiration alone, but through the patient accumulation of countless small, perfectly executed tasks. Welcome back, sleepy historians. Tonight, we're trading our sledges and ramps for chisels and patience as we dive into one of history's most mysteriously soothing projects, carving the Great Sphinx from a single massive outcrop of limestone. From spending decades sculpting whiskers with copper tools, to debating whether that's supposed to be Pharaoh Khafre's face or just a really confident lion, this is the story of humanity's most ambitious portrait session that made Mount Rushmore look like a weekend hobby project. So settle in, maybe adjust that pillow one more time, and let me know in the comments what's helping you relax tonight, because we're about to spend the next half hour in the most patient art studio ever created. You wake before dawn to the gentle tap, tap, tap of hundreds of copper chisels against limestone, a sound so rhythmic and constant it's practically become the heartbeat of the Giza Plateau. Welcome to your life as a master stone carver, circa 2558 BCE, where your job is to turn a stubborn hill of rock into a creature that's part lion, part pharaoh, and entirely impossible to finish in one lifetime. The morning air is cool and still, perfect for precision work before the desert sun makes everything unbearably hot. You stretch, feeling the familiar aches in your shoulders and forearms that come from years of controlled stone removal, and walk to the edge of what will someday be called the Great Sphinx, though right now it looks more like a very ambitious quarry with delusions of grandeur. The scale of what you're attempting is quietly overwhelming. This isn't a statue that you carve and then move into position. This is a hill, a legitimate geological feature that you're slowly, methodically convincing to become a sculpture. 240 feet long, 66 feet high, and carved entirely from the living bedrock. When completed, it will be larger than a modern 12-story building, lying down. But here's the thing about carving monuments from bedrock. You can't change your mind. There's no starting over. No, let's try a different approach. Every chisel strike is permanent. Every design decision is literally set in stone. The margin for error is exactly zero, which means the planning phase took longer than some pharaohs' entire reigns. Your morning inspection routine starts at the head, which is the most technically challenging part of the entire project. The face alone is 14 feet wide, and every feature has to be perfectly proportioned and symmetrical. The nose, when it's finished, will be 4.5 feet long. the mouth will stretch 6 feet across. These are measurements you can't eyeball and hope for the best. The current state of the head shows months of painstaking work. The rough shape is emerging from the stone, like a dream slowly becoming visible in the limestone. The forehead has been carefully rounded, following natural fractures in the rock where possible to avoid unnecessary stress on the remaining stone. The eye sockets are taking shape, deep enough to create proper shadows, but not so deep that they weaken the structure. Working on the face requires a different kind of chisel technique than the rough stone removal happening on the body. These are delicate, controlled strikes, more like sculpting jewelry than quarrying limestone. Each chisel mark has to be planned and executed with the precision of a master craftsman, because a mistake on the pharaoh's nose isn't something you can easily fix with more stone. The limestone itself presents unique challenges that change throughout the day. In the cool morning air, the stone is hard and brittle, requiring careful, gentle strikes to avoid cracking. As the sun warms the rock, it becomes slightly more workable, but also more prone to unexpected fractures. By midday, when the limestone is hot to the touch, precision carving becomes nearly impossible, so the detail work happens in the blessed hours before sunrise and after sunset. The tools of your trade are beautifully simple and frustratingly limited. Copper chisels in dozens of different shapes and sizes, each designed for specific types of cuts. Wide, flat chisels for removing large areas of stone. Narrow, pointed chisels for detail work. Curved chisels for creating smooth, flowing lines. And tiny, delicate chisels for work so fine it's more like engraving than carving. The wooden mallet are works of art themselves, carved from imported hardwoods and weighted perfectly for hours of continuous use without causing hand fatigue. Each carver has multiple mallets, because different types of work require different striking forces. Rough removal needs heavy mallets, while facial detail work requires lighter, more controlled strikes. Your chisel maintenance routine is as important as the carving itself. Copper dulls quickly against limestone, and a dull chisel is not just ineffective, it's dangerous. It can slip, skip, or create uneven cuts that ruin hours of previous work. So every morning begins with careful sharpening, testing the edge against practice stones, and selecting the right tools for the day's planned work. The stone removal process happens in carefully planned layers. You can't just start chiseling randomly and hope a sphinx emerges. Every section of stone that needs to be removed has been marked with red ochre paint, creating a three-dimensional blueprint on the living rock. The master sculptors have spent months measuring, calculating, and marking the guidelines that will transform this hill into a mythical creature. Starting with the rough shaping, teams of workers remove the obvious excess stone using larger chisels and more aggressive techniques. This is heavy, dusty work that fills the air with limestone powder and requires constant water to keep the dust down. The workers wear cloth wraps over their faces and work in shifts to avoid breathing too much stone dust, which everyone has learned is bad for the lungs and general health. The debris removal is a logistical challenge that rivals the pyramid construction project happening nearby. Every chip of stone, every fragment of limestone has to be hauled away from the worksite. Some of the debris gets used for other construction projects, but most of it simply has to be moved to areas where it won't interfere with the ongoing carving work. The hauling crews work constantly, loading stone chips into baskets and carrying them to designated dump areas. It's tedious, repetitive work, but absolutely essential. A buildup of debris can hide important reference marks, create safety hazards for the carvers, and make it impossible to properly evaluate the progress of the work. As the rough shape emerges, the work becomes increasingly specialized. The body of the Sphinx requires different techniques than the head. The lion's body is more forgiving of small imperfections, allowing for broader, more confident chisel strokes. But it also requires understanding of animal anatomy and the ability to create the illusion of muscle and bone beneath the stone fur. The legs are particularly challenging because they have to appear powerful and realistic, while also providing structural support for the entire sculpture. Too much stone removal weakens the statue, but too little makes the legs look clunky and unrealistic. Finding the perfect balance requires constant collaboration between the master sculptors and the structural engineers who understand how limestone behaves under stress. The paws are works of art themselves, each one longer than a modern automobile. The claws have to be carefully carved to look sharp and powerful without actually being sharp enough to create injury hazards for future visitors. The toe pads require subtle modeling to suggest the soft flesh beneath what will eventually appear to be stone fur. Working on the paws requires carvers to lie on their backs or sides for hours at a time, chiseling upward at awkward angles while limestone dust falls into their eyes and hair. It's uncomfortable, tiring work that can only be done for short periods before the carvers need to rest and stretch their cramped muscles. The chest and shoulder area of the Sphinx requires the most sophisticated understanding of anatomy. This has to look like a powerful lion's torso, while also incorporating design elements that will eventually blend smoothly into the human head. The transition from animal to human has to appear natural and magical rather than awkward or anatomically impossible. The back of the Sphinx presents its own unique challenges. While visitors will primarily view the sculpture from the front and sides, the back still has to be properly finished and proportioned. This means carvers spend weeks working on surfaces that few people will ever see closely, maintaining the same high standards of craftsmanship even for the less visible areas. The tail, curled around the right side of the body, requires careful planning to ensure it doesn't create structural weak points in the stone. The curve has to look natural and cat-like while following the existing grain patterns in the limestone to avoid creating fracture lines that could lead to damage over the centuries. Weather becomes an increasingly important factor as more of the sculpture is exposed. The newly carved surfaces are more vulnerable to wind erosion and temperature changes than the original rock face. Rain, rare but devastating when it occurs, can cause rapid weathering of detailed carving work, requiring immediate repairs and protective measures. The work schedule is carefully planned around the daily temperature changes. The finest detail work happens in the cool hours just after sunrise, when the limestone is stable and the carver's hands are steady. Rough stone removal happens during the warmer midday hours, when precision is less critical, but muscle power is at its peak. Late afternoon is reserved for tool maintenance, planning, and the careful measurement checks that ensure the sculpture is developing according to the master plan. The carvers use knotted ropes, wooden measuring sticks, and bronze calipers to verify that proportions are correct and that both sides of the sculpture are properly symmetrical. The evening hours, as the stone cools and shadows grow long, are perfect for evaluating the day's progress. The changing light reveals subtleties in the carving work that aren't visible in direct sunlight, allowing the master sculptors to spot areas that need refinement or correction. The apprentice carvers learn their trade through years of careful observation and practice. They start by working on hidden areas of the sculpture, learning to control their chisel strikes and develop the muscle memory necessary for precision stone carving. Only after demonstrating consistent skill are they allowed to work on visible surfaces. The master carvers have spent decades perfecting their craft, and their expertise shows in the subtle details that bring the stone to life. The way they create the illusion of soft fur using hard limestone, the technique for carving eyes that seem to gaze into the distance, the ability to make stone appear to have weight and movement. The facial features require the most specialized skills and the longest training. The eyes, in particular, have to convey intelligence and authority while also fitting perfectly with the overall proportions of the head. The upper eyelids have to create the right amount of shadow, the lower lids have to suggest the soft flesh around the eyes, and the pupils have to be positioned to create the desired gaze direction. The nose, when it's eventually completed, will be a masterpiece of stone carving. The nostrils have to be carved deep enough to create realistic shadows without weakening the stone. The bridge has to follow the natural bone structure of the human nose while also integrating smoothly with the overall design of the face. The mouth requires perhaps the most delicate work of all. The lips have to appear soft and natural while being carved from hard limestone. The line where the lips meet has to be precisely placed to create the desired expression, authoritative but not threatening, calm but not sleepy. The ears, when they're eventually carved, will require understanding of both human and lion anatomy. They have to look natural and properly positioned while also serving as important structural elements that help support the weight of the head and distribute stress throughout the sculpture. The headdress, traditional for pharaohs, adds another layer of complexity to the carving work. The fabric has to appear to drape naturally over the head and shoulders while being carved from solid stone. The folds and pleats require careful planning to ensure they look realistic and also help disguise any minor imperfections in the underlying stone. The uraeus, the cobra symbol of royal power, will eventually crown the forehead in a display of intricate carving that requires the skills of the most experienced artisans. The serpent has to appear alert and threatening while being small enough not to dominate the overall design of the face. Quality control involves constant evaluation and re-evaluation of the work in progress. Master sculptors examine each section from multiple angles and in different lighting conditions to ensure that the carving meets the exacting standards required for a royal monument. Work that doesn't meet these standards has to be refined, reworked, or sometimes completely redone. The measurement and proportion checks happen daily using the same mathematical principles that guide the pyramid construction. The Sphinx has to follow precise geometric relationships that create visual harmony and ensure that the finished sculpture will appear balanced and powerful from every viewing angle. The seasonal rhythms of the Nile affect the Sphinx carving project just as they do the pyramid construction. During flood season, when agricultural work demands most of the population, the carving crews are reduced to essential specialists who focus on the most delicate work. During the dry season, larger crews can work on stone removal and rough shaping. The limestone quarries that provide additional stone for repairs and modifications operate on the same seasonal schedule. Fresh limestone has to be properly aged and weathered before it can be used for repair work, ensuring that new stone will weather at the same rate as the original sculpture. The water supply for the carving crews requires careful management. Stone dust control needs constant water supplies, the workers need drinking water, and the stone itself occasionally needs to be wetted to prevent cracking during delicate carving operations. Food preparation for the specialized carving crews follows the same principles as feeding the pyramid workers, but with additional considerations for workers who need steady hands and sharp eyesight. The diet includes extra rations of foods believed to improve vision and reduce hand tremors. The tool-making workshops operate around the clock, producing the specialized chisels and mallets required for different aspects of the carving work. Each type of stone carving requires subtly different tool designs, and the master tool makers work closely with the carvers to create implements that are perfectly suited to their specific tasks. The copper supply chain becomes increasingly important as the project progresses. The finest carving work requires the highest quality copper, properly alloyed and tempered to maintain sharp edges while resisting breakage. Inferior copper tools can ruin weeks of careful work with a single, improperly controlled strike. The administrative side of the project requires tracking not just materials and workers, but also the progress of thousands of individual carving tasks. Scribes maintain detailed records of which sections are complete, which are in progress, and which are waiting for materials or specialized workers. The artistic decisions require consultation among master sculptors, royal officials, and religious authorities. Every aspect of the Sphinx's appearance carries symbolic meaning that has to be approved by people who understand the religious and political implications of the design choices. The structural engineering consultations happen regularly as more stone is removed. Engineers evaluate the stability of the remaining rock and advise on how much additional material can be safely removed without compromising the long-term durability of the sculpture. The safety considerations become more complex as the sculpture takes shape. Workers operating at different levels have to coordinate their activities to avoid accidents. Stone chips falling from upper work areas can injure carvers working below, requiring careful scheduling and protective measures. The scaffolding systems have to be constantly modified as the shape of the sculpture changes. What works for rough stone removal may not provide proper access for detail carving. The scaffolding crews work closely with the carvers to ensure that platforms and supports are positioned to provide safe, comfortable working positions. The lighting considerations become increasingly important for precision work. Natural sunlight provides the best illumination for evaluating carving quality, but the angle of the light changes throughout the day, revealing different aspects of the work in progress. Oil lamps and torches allow some work to continue after sunset, but the flickering light makes precision carving dangerous. Evening work focuses on planning, measurement, and preparation activities that don't require the fine motor control needed for stone carving. The dust control measures protect not just the worker's health, but also the quality of the carving work. Stone dust settling on freshly carved surfaces can obscure important details and make it difficult to evaluate the progress and quality of the work. The water used for dust control has to be carefully managed to avoid creating mud that could stain the limestone or create slippery working conditions. The drainage systems channel runoff away from the work areas and prevent water from pooling around the base of the sculpture. The preservation of reference marks and guidelines becomes increasingly challenging as the carving work progresses. The original layout marks get carved away as the sculpture takes shape, requiring constant remeasuring and remarking to maintain proper proportions. The documentation of techniques and discoveries helps preserve the knowledge gained during the project for future sculptural work. Scribes record successful carving methods, effective tool designs, and solutions to technical problems that arise during the work. The integration with the nearby pyramid construction requires coordination of schedules, materials, and workforce. Workers and supervisors move between projects as skills are needed, and both projects share the same supply chains and support services. The religious ceremonies associated with the Sphinx carving follow ancient traditions for blessing artistic work and ensuring divine approval of the royal monument. Priests perform daily rituals to maintain spiritual protection for the workers and blessing for the successful completion of the project. The symbolic orientation of the Sphinx requires precise astronomical calculations. The sculpture has to face the exact direction that aligns with important celestial events and maintains proper relationships with other monuments in the Giza complex. The final stages of carving require the most experienced artisans working at the peak of their abilities. Every chisel strike has to be perfect because there are no opportunities for major corrections once the sculpture nears completion. The surface finishing work involves progressively finer tools and techniques to create the smooth, polished appearance that befits a royal monument. This process can take months of careful work to achieve the desired surface quality. The final inspection and approval process involves not just the master sculptors, but also royal officials, priests, and engineers who evaluate every aspect of the completed work. The sculpture has to meet not just artistic standards, but also structural, religious, and political requirements. The completion celebration, when it finally arrives, marks the end of decades of patient, methodical work. The finished Sphinx stands as a monument to human persistence, artistic vision, and the ability to transform raw stone into eternal beauty. As the sun sets over the completed sculpture, casting long shadows across the desert, the Great Sphinx begins its eternal watch over the Giza Plateau. The workers who carved its features can rest, knowing they've created something that will endure for millennia, a guardian carved from the living rock that will outlast empires and civilizations. As the gentle evening breeze carries the whispers of ancient carvers, the soft tapping of copper chisels on limestone, and the satisfied sighs of craftsmen who've completed the work of a lifetime, creating a timeless lullaby that connects us across the ages to the remarkable artisans who turned a hill into a dream. And in the peaceful desert silence, punctuated only by the wind across carved stone and the distant sounds of the Nile, we can rest knowing that some achievements transcend their creators, built through patience, precision, and the kind of dedication that carves dreams from solid rock, one careful chisel strike at a time. The eternal guardian watches over the sands of time. Its enigmatic smile holds secrets of ancient